Hello, all. This is the roundtable hosted by the Environment and Social Issues Cluster at Nickel and Dime, which is the official research platform of the Center for New Economic Studies, OPGINDA Global University. Now, today's discussion is about the 2023 Sikkim Flash Floods that has devastated the state earlier this October. Heavy rains caused the glacier South Lhonak Lake in Sikkim to breach its bank and cause the Glacial Lake outburst flood. Now, the flood reached the Teesta Dam at midnight, and before the gates could be opened, the dam was destroyed in minutes. It has been termed as the deadliest flood in the area after the 1968 Sikkim floods, and till date, at least 40 bodies have been recovered as a result of this flood. And it becomes imperative for us to have a discussion on the same. Now, for the first question, calling the glacial lake outburst flood calamity a quote unquote freak incident, the Indian government is not ready to write off the hydropower projects that were damaged in the process. Do you think the decision has been made in due consideration, or is it time to maybe stop the projects or like kind of halt the same? Yeah, please go ahead.
Should I introduce myself?
It's unnecessary, but like if you want to, you can definitely go ahead.
Okay, so my name is Jayendra. I'm a final year student at JSIS. So, uh, for the naming of the freak accident, I mean the term itself, freak accident, by the government implies that it is an anomaly, right? So, the term itself should be questioned in the first place, according to me, because labeling these incidents, which are not actually freak incidents. They are systematic, response or systematic events which are happening due to the constant overflowing of the glacial lakes because of climate change. So the term itself, freak incident, is to sort of showcase that this thing can will not happen again, or it is just something which was an accident. So then that gives the government a chance to actually not write off these projects, because then the risk associated with the environmental impacts could be downplayed. So in this context, in this specific context, of course, the decision made to not write off these projects, like two hydropower projects were actually damaged, and the impact of those specific projects was always there. And even before their construction, a lot of communities and activists, warned the government about not having those projects in the first place because of the displacement, because of the loss of biodiversity in the local regions. But now that they have been constructed, which was an exercise of geopolitical and strategic reasons by the Indian government, especially in those regions. So that specific labeling of it as a freak accident, I feel like uh, they should at least listen to the local stakeholders present without before going forward with these kind of decisions, because in the end these kinds of events will keep on happening, because the temperature change induced by climate change is not going to stop. So I believe, firstly, the questioning of the terminology used by the government itself should be encouraged in order to see what the true intentions are, and then I believe it is time to actually not just stop, but stop and halt and consider what are the motivations behind these projects, and should we even be having discussions on having them. So that is my take.
No, I completely agree with you on that because you raised a very great point about obviously the terminology of a freak accident. Because if we look at climate change and if we look at the global developments around climate change, we have like kind of realized that it's you will not see immediate effects. Like it's not something that has an immediate cause and effect, but like it has a continuous effect. And the at the end of the day, it can all be linked to climate change. So these are not just freak incidents; it is completely systemic, and there's like obviously a huge denial of that fact that it's a part of something greater. And I think this might be covered in our next question too, but like you mentioned, like a great point about we need to conduct these environment impact assessments, and we kind of have to realize the efficacy of the processes and how exactly are these processes being conducted in the areas. And I think that question gets like deeply political too. So what I'll be doing now is probably moving on to the next question, and hopefully Rajika can take that question up. So this is a bit generalized, but we can obviously take it in context of the Sikkim floods. What steps can be taken to balance economic development and environmental protection in areas that are like susceptible to GLOF?
I think one of the steps that can be taken to balance both the factors would be just to take sort of a dam test to conduct if a dam breaks or a fail, so that it can help us give an idea when it comes to environmental clearance of that area, and it will help to mitigate the situation that may arise. Uh, that's one point that just came to my mind.
No, that's a great point, and I think if you can just like elaborate a bit more in the sense like when we talk about dam tests, right? How exactly can we like do you think go about it? Because do we look at the processes after the dam has been constructed, after the approval has been present, or I'm like I just if you could just elaborate a bit more on that point.
Well, it also depends on where exactly are we going to situate the dam, right? So if, it also depends on not just to not just to help the clear the environment, but also the people who would be at stake during the time during the effect. So it is to see all that consideration while you attempt a test, and it is to create sort of a spatial environment, or like a or like a case where you see, you know, a dam falling within such conditions, and with people uh, and dam itself, to see what sort of factors can it simulate or may leak to an extent, what sort of damage can lead when such effects happen.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I completely agree with you there. And I think, like I mentioned before, that's where the environment impact assessments come in. I think in one of my electives, we were having a discussion how sustainable development, which is basically uh, what we're talking about over here, balancing environment protection and economic considerations. So how sustainable development has become a kind of like a slogan or like a catchy phrase where everyone says we are developing sustainably, but we don't really know what that entails. And I think this is like a clear example of that because if we look at the hydropower projects, which is the dam that is being developed, you may call it that, it's a renewable energy and we can, it's essentially promoting sustainable development. But we kind of also have to look at the costs that come with it. And we also have to look at how exactly are we assessing the impact of the same. And thank you so much for that answer, Ruchika. So what I'll be moving on is to the next question, which is basically, are there any ethical considerations when it comes to GLOF management, especially regarding the vulnerable and the marginalized populations? And obviously, when we look at the long-term environmental consequences. Yeah, please go ahead, Jayendra.
Yes, so I mean, when we start talking about the marginalized population, first of all, most of the people that live in these vulnerable regions are vulnerable to all of the effects of climate change, and even in those people, there is a subset of people which are highly dependent on the local economy. So when those people are considered, there is a lack of effort from the state governments and even the central government a lot of times to help them sort of build more resilience so that whenever such things happen they don't have to they are not stranded in a limbo where their homes are lost and they have nowhere to go, because what happens a lot of the times is that there is a lot of development that happens in these regions due to tourism and whatnot. There is a lot of para-diplomacy involved. So that development does not actually trickle down as such to the lower echelons of the society. So those people that do not have access to go outside have much better built homes. They are still living in the same condition that they were living 50, 20, 100 years back. So those native people which rely solely on the resources which are there, they are always left behind. So whenever these big projects come up, there will always be an ethical dilemma as to whether we should help those people just to stay where they are, make them more resilient, provide them with the resources that they can adapt to these changes. Even in SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, there are differences between mitigation and adaptation. So, what exactly should we do? Should we help mitigate the causes, or should we provide more funds towards adaptation so that these people can live in their own way that they have been living for a very long time? And what happens is whenever these floods happen, these people leave. These people are left with nothing, so they can't go into the other states like the people who benefited from the development, and then they have to sort of they are stuck somewhere in the middle. And since the support from the state itself can be not very homogeneous, so these people are stuck in a way where they are just not able to free themselves, and they further fall back into the poverty, below the poverty line again. So of course there will always be ethical considerations. There will always be an ethical dilemma. I believe participatory appraisal methods of involving more local stakeholders would be a better way to approach the management of these vulnerable regions, because the community leaders play a better role of showing the interest of those people. So I believe a more on-ground approach is required, not blanket development or blanket help from direct funding. So yes, those are like some of the things I think the government should focus on.
Thank you so much for your response. It was like very insightful. Ruchika, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, something on similar lines also. So, I mean, first, while constructing the dam itself, the ethical concern arise there to displace them or to make them resilient enough, like within, like they said that, or to make them resilient enough so that they can sustain at that same space. Uh, and this in turn may give so there is a great ethical dilemma, yes, but it also sort of gives those people, the local people, sort of a hope that again and again there is a confidence in the government, there is a hope that we will get stabilized either through displacement or by getting more funds. But at the end of the day, um, given such floods are not taken into consideration, that governmental planning which sees these people at the first place as sort of disordered or like a mess which sort of is hindering the developmental process of government, is faced with this challenge of now replacing these people. So that comes along with an ethical concern during the beginning and even afterwards.
Yes, I completely agree with you. And I think just to like add on to the whole discussion at hand, the government has like introduced a kind of scheme, which is your Punarvas Awas Yojana, which is basically to assist the affected flood victims over here. And they have like obviously mentioned that it's mainly a rehabilitation program where they are going to provide housing, they will provide essentials such as kitchen utensils, gas stoves, cylinders, mattresses, blankets, and for the children, they're going to provide books and cover their tuition fees for a while. But what I personally think is that this is like deeply reactionary, and I do not think that the government was prepared for like a disaster at such a scale. And when we again talk about the ethical considerations, when again we look at the schemes that are being introduced, we really need to look at how exactly are these schemes being implemented and who exactly are going to be the main benefactors of these schemes. Like a certain amount or a fund can be dedicated to them, but like, are they really reaching them is like a big question mark, and nobody can really tell for sure unless you're there on the ground. So I do think, and I completely agree with everyone, like we need to have an on-ground appraisal and we need to look at the considerations on the ground and we have to kind of uh, prioritize. I personally think we have to like prioritize the needs of the marginalized the most, because I think once that is prioritized, uh, we can kind of make sure that, we're kind of like moving towards a just transition into a more of like, you could say, sustainable development in that sense. Uh, is there's nothing else to add, and I think I can move on to the next question. Or like, would any of you like to like add something?
I think we can move to the next question.
All right, great. So this will probably be like our final question, and which is that, and I think in the date of major digital changes, we have like a data protection bill too, and I think data has become the new catchy phrase in that in that sense. So, can innovative technologies such as artificial intelligence, remote sensing, and big data analytics, do you think they can be used to improve flood monitoring and response? Because if you look at the Sikkim floods, right, one of the biggest criticisms that has essentially and arose has been that there was not enough monitoring and there was not enough warning, and that's why the disaster essentially scaled up to the way it did. So what do you guys think? Yeah, Chandra, go ahead.
So there is already, there is a lot of development which has been done in remote sensing, in GIS softwares, and the data which is kept in place through constant real-time monitoring for these rivers and the water flow. But I believe that this kind of infrastructure itself, oftentimes what I've noticed is that this kind of infrastructure is isolated or concentrated in certain areas which are much more important to the government. So, say in the southern regions of the country, there are disaster management and water management protocols and systems set up in place with expensive machinery, because the state government itself, either through external funding or through the central funding or through fundraising, they do get access to certain technologies which help predicting these things. But when it comes to the northeast region, in and of itself, the region gets does not get that much funding when it comes to these kind of technologies. They're mostly seen as a tourist area, not as a development area. And whatever development which comes around is, sometimes and mostly goes to such, geopolitical, motivated concepts and projects such as these big dams. And so this kind of disparity in where the funding is going from, where it's coming from, this leads to a vacuum of data, which eventually leads to events like this. And it in that specific region as well, in the northeast region, China has a lot of data when it comes to these river monitoring, because of the virtue of the fact that the Brahmaputra river and other rivers, they just flow out of China itself. So they have an advantage in that sense of having access to data, which sometimes they are not willing to share. Even though in the agreements of transboundary rivers, it is often a request, or it is a fact that you have to share critical data according to the needs of the country. So in that sense, now data, with the kind of technology that we have, is one of the most important tools we can use, and to predict complex behavior of these events is actually a kind of a superpower for nation states. So I believe for India itself, they should focus more on providing these kind of technologies to the northeast regions, which are actually vulnerable to these regions. Of course, there is already a lot of these technology present, but as we've seen, it might not have been that effective, which shows that there is room for improvement in that sense as well. So it goes without saying that ISRO and other extra governmental institutions, they should focus on providing these critical regions with that set of technologies, maybe having more people to people and skill development the programs in those regions, so that the people themselves can learn and try to protect their habitat, because it is what they want. And that will also help them have much more development in terms of technical skills, which a lot of the times these regions do not get because of the lack of proper education. So in this sense, in this context, it becomes extremely important to have these technologies, which are often buzzwords, but in reality they do play a critical role when saving these kinds of number of lives.
Definitely, definitely. I think you've like raised like a lot of critical points and given us like a lot of insights. So thank you for that. I think before I give my inputs, Ruchika, do you have like anything to add?
No, no.
All right, great. So I think on this point, especially when we talk about technology, right? Like you mentioned that they are buzzwords, but at the end of the day, they are important. I think what probably the perspective I can bring in is a bit of a political perspective. And if you look at all the framework conventions and the treaties and the agreements between the countries, let's leave states for a bit. Even if you look at the agreements between countries and all the conference of parties, there has been like an agreement to kind of share the data or like share the technologies that are there, especially if you look at the north-south divide, right? But again, what we can see is that the sharing of data does not really take place, or like at least there is definitely a gap in the implementation. And you rightly mentioned that when we talk about the government, they only care about the places that are profitable to them or that will be like important to them. And it is not really an equitable distribution of resources, especially the new technologies that are like being developed. And even after these technologies are being developed, we have to again look at a lot of ethical consideration as to how exactly are they being developed, who exactly is working on the technology, are they being paid, firstly, and secondly, is the technology being subsidized for the states that cannot afford it. And Northeast has been a very volatile region, both if we look at the political aspect and again the climate aspect of it too. And what the Northeast kind of is sort of like disconnected from the mainland India, and that's the main narrative that keeps going forward. And like you mentioned, that the government only sees it as a touristy place or like a volatile area that is prone to conflicts, and because of that, they don't really get access to the technologies that are like extremely, extremely important. So, thank you for raising the wonderful points. So, if are there any like other thoughts or like final considerations that you would like to just mention about the topic at hand?
I mean, one thing that comes to my mind is that whenever such things happen, they're often forgotten as one-time event. So I believe constantly keeping these events, or maybe even securitizing them, turning them into security issues, would be a good approach to at least keep these problems in the limelight much longer, rather than talking about different kinds of issues and forgetting about these only because these happen once, or once a few years. But in the end, these events will eventually become much more frequent as time comes. So I believe the time to act will eventually get shorter and shorter. So it is important to have more discussions, have more expertise in this specific area, these specific events, so as to not just let this one slide and eventually reap bigger uh, issues from this.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's not just a freak incident. It keeps happening, and it's not like there are multiple freak incidents. Obviously, there's something bigger at play, and that something bigger is obviously climate change. And I think it is time that we kind of move behind just targets and goals and just all talk. And we have to take like concrete action in such a way and in such an equitable way so that no one gets left behind. as we progress forward. Because when we talk about climate change and we talk about the Paris Convention, we talk about our 1.5 or 2-degree goal, right? And we do mention that if that is reached, what it will lead to is basically catastrophic climate change, and that will essentially just lead to a loss of civilization. And we have to remember that when we look at all these isolated incidents that are not really isolated and they are part of like something much bigger. So I think with that, we conclude our roundtable. Thank you so much for joining for this discussion. And I think we definitely learned a lot more insights on the Sikkim flood. And I think we can probably take a lot more points from here moving forward as to the adaptation, mitigation, and prevention techniques for the same.
Thank you.